That'd be a good thing to do. Welcome to the May 8th, 2024 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I am John Dixon, Chairman of the Plan Commission, and at this time I'd like to have the commissioners introduce themselves, starting on my far left.
Yeah, my name is Paul Thomas.
Barrett Davey. Louis Pickus.
Jamie Moorhead.
Mark Pasquazi.
Lisa Nearing.
Thank you. And from the City of Lake Forest staff tonight, we have Miss Kathy Cernak here. The next item.
We have a new Abigail.
And Abigail Volmers.
Oh, thank
one of our
you.
new planners.
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't alert you to that.
All right. And Abigail, thank you for joining us here this evening. Thank you, Commissioner Pickus. The next item before the commission this evening is consideration of the minutes from the February 15th, 2024 meeting. Did everybody have a chance to review those? Are there any comments, questions, clarifications on the minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to accept the February 15th, 2024 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The first matter before the commission this evening is a preliminary information and input session for the property located at 3110 Lake Road and 1235 Elm Tree Road. We're going to hear from the current owners and their representatives, the city, and any possible neighbors that are here this evening in regards to a vision for this property going forward and a possible subdivision for the existing parcel into two separate lots. No formal action is being requested or required from the commission this evening. At this point, I'd like to ask the commission members if there's any conflicts of interest or any ex parte communication in this matter.
No.
No. Seeing that there is none, at this time, I would like to swear in everyone this evening who would like to or think they might like to speak either in support or in opposition of this matter. If you could please stand where you are and raise your hand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Good. Thank you. With that, I will ask the petitioner and their team to come forward to the podium. Please state your name and proceed. Thank you for coming tonight.
Hi, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. My name is Nate. I'm a principal with Northworks Architects, and we're here to talk about the Lake Road property that was formerly part of the Kersey Coates Reed Estate. Before I jump in, I'm just going to introduce the two individuals who are planning to purchase the property, and they'll just introduce themselves.
Nate, could you hold on just a minute? Is that microphone on?
I don't think it is.
Well, I can hear.
All right. Sounds like
Yeah,
it
sounds
has
like
a
it's
green light. Okay. Speak right into it. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. I'm just going to have Ethan Mears and Marion Rice introduce themselves briefly, and then I'll get into the presentation.
Please come to the podium and state your name.
I'm Ethan Mears. I grew up in Lake Bluff. I currently live in Chicago. We've spent the past 10 years using the tennis house, which belongs to my stepfather, as a weekend sort of summer destination for us. Have very deep connections to this community. My father grew up just down the street here on Green Bay and Deer Path. My sister, our father, I should say. Our great-grandparents on my mom's side had a house across the street, and various aunts and great aunts and uncles and cousins, and this is a very important place to us, and preserving this property is a very important project for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mears.
Hello. I'm Marion Rice, and as Ethan stated, we both grew up here, and I currently live in Lake Bluff, and we just really love the property. We want to continue for it to be a a place where our family spends time. My husband and I had our wedding reception at this property. We just are very committed to this community as a whole. We're very heavily involved here, and just have a deep love for the property and a deep love for the community. And that's all we have to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rice.
Okay, thanks very much. So the property in question is part of the Kersey Coates Reed Estate. The area that we're talking about is west of Lake Road. The original estate house is on the east side of Lake Road on the lake. There's a long family connection with this property going back to the original owner of the house, Miss Kersey Coates Reed, who built the house in 1931. The tennis house actually predates the estate house by a year. They built that in advance of the main house so that the family could summer in the tennis house while the main house was being completed. On the west side of the property, there's 2 additional structures in addition to the tennis house. There's what's called the cottage, which is actually an original farmhouse on the property that predates the Kersey Coates Reed Estate, but was reclad in brick and remodeled by David Adler during the development of the property. There's also a former carriage house that similarly was reclad in brick and remodeled as part of the Kersey Coates Reed estate. All of those structures are towards the western end of that property. In between those former outbuildings and the main estate house, there's a very extensive, beautiful garden that's been lovingly maintained over the decades. The current owner, Stephen Bent, he cannot be here today. He's in Florida, where he spends most of his time. But he purchased this property several decades ago and has been a really immaculate steward of the property. I know many of you guys walked around, and you can see how well the buildings have been maintained and the garden has been maintained over all these years. And Stephen bought the property from his uncle, who was the son of Miss Kersey Coates Reed, and so that family connection persists. Stephen is now spending most of his time in Florida, and he's getting up in years, and he's ready to pass on the baton for maintaining this historic property. The family has a deep love of this property. They've maintained it beautifully. They've invested in it. The tennis house is not a building that's occupied on a full-time basis. As Ethan mentioned, he and his family do rent out the cottage, and they use that for summer weekends. And there's also an apartment above the carriage house where that's rented out for a caretaker for the property. When we got involved in this property, it was really based on Stephen wanting to pass this baton and move this property into the future. And when he wanted to do that, Ethan and Marion were very eager to pick up that baton and take it forward into the future. It seemed like a perfect arrangement because Ethan is more interested in the tennis house and the buildings on the west side of the property, where he already has spent a lot of time over weekends while renting that cottage with his family. And Marion and her husband, Tanner, have a deep connection with the garden, having their wedding reception in the garden. They are in Lake Bluff, so they can bike from their home, 10 minutes, be in the garden. They have picnics there. They bring their kids there. They really spend a lot of time enjoying that space. With a property like this that has persisted from the 30s and has not really been changed, there's always challenges in how a property like this moves into the future. I can understand why people would want this property to maintain, be together, but really to bring this estate into the future and maintain the property, there have been portions of this property broken off over time as time has passed. So to really make this a feasible transition, we really feel the property needs to have individual owners who can have their own rights and privileges, but also so because of the historic nature of the property, there are several conditions on the property that are unusual and non-conforming. So what we're looking to achieve is have a discussion with the board. We've been having discussions with Kathy about the best way to achieve what we'd like to achieve, which is splitting the property into 2 lots, and then also taking consideration of the non-conforming conditions on the property. So some of those non-conforming conditions, you've probably noticed all the properties are right at the top of the ravine. And so none of the 3 structures on the property conform to the steep slope setback. This is the plat of survey for the property. I think you have this in your packet too. But you can see where all the existing structures are right along that ravine, and the tennis house itself actually bridges the top of that ravine. There's also a tennis court, a surface tennis court on the property in the corner that does not conform to current setbacks. And then the property is also over bulk based on the built structures that currently are on the property. The overage of that bulk is largely due to the tennis court. If you sort of subtracted that portion from the structures would actually be a little bit under bulk. But with that massive indoor tennis court, we're hitting bulk planes on every single bulk plane there is. We have a lot of basement bulk because it has a daylight exterior to the ravine. We have a full first floor bulk because that obviously cuts through it. The second floor bulk cuts through the structure as well. And we actually capture some third floor bulk at the ridge of the building. Going into the future, the way that Ethan and Marion would like to use the property is really largely the way they've been using it up until today. Ethan would like to continue to use the property as a weekend getaway for his family. If once he purchases the property, they would, instead of using the cottage, they'd start using the tennis house. Marion would like to continue to use the garden. She would like to actually expand the garden towards Lake Road and include some garden features. Currently, access to the property is from Lake Road. When you visited the property, there's a long driveway coming off of Lake Road that runs along the garden. There is a gateway on Elm Tree Road and access off of that road. There's not currently a driveway, but there's a place that one could be added. When we have thought about future development of the property, access and parking is obviously a big consideration. Right now, the parking area is pretty far from the house. And so we do envision bringing a driveway off of Elm Tree Road. The current gateway is actually a really great location for the driveway entrance. When you come in from that gateway, you actually have a beautiful view of the tennis house, a really great angle. Some of the other non-conforming conditions on the site. On the garden side of the property, the zoning code actually doesn't allow improvements to a lot that are where there's no primary residence. So obviously, as a landscaped piece of property, there's no primary residence in that location. So we would need a variance for that. And then parts of the garden wall are within the setbacks of that lot as well. That's That's kind of the general condition we're looking at. It's a really unique property. We have two individuals who have a deep connection to the property and want to be stewards of this property going into the future. And we have an owner who's ready to hand that baton over.
Thank you. Comments by city staff, please. Kathy?
Thank you, Chairman Dixon, members of the commission. This is before you because it is such a unique property. It's not the first time that we have brought something to the Plan Commission as an introduction. It's really an opportunity for you to get familiar with the property, for neighbors to begin to understand that there's some discussion, and really a chance for us to hear from you so that we can think through the process. We didn't want to send the petitioners off to have plans prepared or plats of subdivision really until we had a chance to think it through. The Plan Commission does have a process called a planned preservation subdivision. That type of subdivision is required in areas where we have an overlay district. This property is within the overlay district. You recently saw a subdivision on Anwensia. That property was not in the overlay district, so you considered that as a subdivision with variances. In this case, you have the opportunity to consider this as a planned preservation subdivision with approval through a special use permit. Planned preservation subdivisions are intended to provide flexibility to the commission as long as the underlying density that would be permitted is not exceeded, intended to allow flexibility, but also intended to allow the Plan Commission to put some parameters in place. In this case, and I won't review all the nonconformities that exist, but it's a very unusual property. Through a planned preservation subdivision, you could identify pre-existing conditions. For instance, you could acknowledge and, in effect, exempt the existing square footage of the tennis court based on the fact that it is a very significant historic building that really deserves preservation. You could do that as part of the subdivision. You could adjust setback lines, not the steep slope line, because that is really intended to preserve and protect the ravine, but you could adjust setback lines. You could identify considerations that you want taken into account in actually configuring each of the lots. So you have that flexibility as well as the ability to put parameters in place. The reason we are here tonight, or the reason why the petitioners couldn't just move forward with selling the property and putting the property in two separate ownerships, is because by definition of the zoning code, it is a single zoning lot. Although it's three separate tax parcels do not always directly relate to a zoning lot. This has been in common ownership, it's been in common use, and there are improvements that cross the entire property. Therefore, it is a single zoning lot, and in order to sell off pieces, put pieces of it into separate ownership, a subdivision is required. The plan preservation tool that you have is specifically designed to allow you to make concessions that will preserve significant natural features, in this case the ravine, portions of the garden, as well as significant historic features. The structures on the property, the gates, the piers, the columns. So that tool, in staff's opinion, really fits this petition very well. What we're looking for from you tonight, as the chairman said, we're not looking for any formal action from you, but we're looking for your thoughts, your questions, and we're not going to be able to answer all your questions tonight, your creative ideas. We'd like you to send us a way to work with the petitioner to really think through how we bring back a subdivision plat that configures lots, that plans for the future. With respect to the east lot, although there's no intention to build a house, once we parcel that lot off, it has improvements, and if it were sold 3 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, it would be a buildable lot. So if that lot is developed, where might the appropriate location be for a buildable area? So again, we're looking to you tonight to give us your creative ideas, challenge us with questions, and send us a way to work together to bring you back something that will recognize the great stewards this family has been of the property, but also set this in motion for the future with some limitations as well as some flexibility. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Why don't we see if there are some questions or clarifications with commission members here. I'll start on my far right with Commissioner Nearing.
Okay, well, I actually have a few, so I might actually come back and ask you some more questions. In terms of the driveway from Elm Tree, is your thinking that you want to connect that just to the tennis house, or have a very, very long driveway to the other part? Which is your intent, right?
I think that long-term, we'd want the driveway to connect back to the carriage house. If that driveway from Lake Road ever went away or was inaccessible to the Elm Tree property, those buildings wouldn't be reachable by car without a driveway. I think in the immediate term, we'd want a shorter driveway with parking on the west side of the tennis house.
Okay, so that could possibly, and I'll ask to see that question in a second. The other
David
question-
Adler did have a driveway originally in that location that connected Elm Tree to the carriage house as well.
Yeah, come back to me. I have some more. Go ahead, you guys.
I'm gonna save all of mine for Lisa, so she can ask them for me, so go ahead.
Okay.
I just have the formula. I didn't think you'd pick me for it.
I'll go, it's no problem. Assuming we were to subdivide, do you have plans to improve the property?
There are
any
some-
structures on either?
There are some plans to improve the property. There's no immediate plan for additional habitable structures. The plans for the future are to do a light sensitive remodel to the tennis house to make that a little bit more usable as a single family home. That structure was actually built as kind of like a clubhouse with locker rooms. The family did live in there for one summer, but it's not set up like a single family home, and there's things that we would like to do to make it a little bit more functional, like add a better kitchen. That's the primary goal of that side of the property for now. We have some future thoughts about if there was ever the need or desire to add a pool house. We've also thought about, and this is really working with Kathy and trying to like brainstorm about what the future could hold, because no one knows what happens in 3 years, 20 years. So really trying to brainstorm different ideas. If you connect the cottage and the carriage house, there's actually kind of a perfect way to connect them. And that actually becomes a pretty nice single family home. The tennis house probably will never really function as a full-time single family home. It can work well as a weekend home, but it's not set up to be a true single family home. And to really make it function like that, you'd have to do a lot of deconstruction, which we don't want to do. So if Ethan and his family ever did want to move to Lake Forest, we'd probably look at connecting the cottage and the carriage house, and that would become more of a single family home.
Okay, but so for the west lot, you haven't contemplated any area you'd like to build, like a pool house? Like you don't have a building envelope or footprint in mind?
We don't have a footprint in mind. We've more thought about kind of functions. I imagine if we did do a pool, we'd probably want it in the yard south of the house. But that's me putting on my architect hat and not talking to Ethan about where he wants this pool.
And then for the east lot, no plans for?
For the east lot, Marion and her husband Tanner would like to expand the garden and actually added a garden addition to the Lake Road side of the existing Vitale garden. There's actually quite a significant setback from Lake Road between the garden and Lake Road.
Okay, and then just questions for staff. Has there been a tree inventory done on this property at all to identify which trees are?
That's actually a
class one
question
or
for
whatever it
the
is.
petitioner. Well, I haven't seen one that I know of, but we haven't asked for, again, we haven't asked for a complete application, we really discourage the petitioner from going too far. So Nate, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, we don't have a tree plat right now. What we do have is the steep slope setback, which has a lot of the built features and the grading. And we could certainly get a tree survey. There's some significant trees, especially along Lake Road, and I'd say the ravine. The garden and the yard are obviously pretty open.
Okay, so that's typically done by the petitioner, not the city arborist? I don't.
Correct.
Okay.
We would get a tree survey,
arborist looks it over.
and then our arborist would review it and go out to the site.
Okay.
When we were talking about connecting the driveway, you can kind of see where the driveway used to, it's actually, if you were there, there's kind of a little tiny stone pathway that comes off of like a stub.
You're on lot 27, Nate? Is that right? Lot 27, you're talking about the one on the west side, on the elm
Yes.
tree side, right?
There's a little stone path that goes to the tennis house, and that actually kind of mirrors the route of the driveway that used to be there, and it threads through those big trees because obviously the trees were planted, flanking the driveway. So we would be able to put in a driveway in that similar location and preserve those trees.
Okay. And then a question for staff. Has there ever been done, have you ever done a plan where you're looking at what the allowable buildable area is, assuming there's no variances, and you're just adding all the setbacks under the code, what a buildable lot would look like? I'm assuming on the west lot, there probably isn't much because of the bulk issues, but have we done that on the east lot at all, or is it possible to do that?
It's certainly possible to do that. We've certainly eyeballed it out, knowing standard setbacks, standard front yard setback is 50, the two sides are 20, but that's expanded on the north side because of the steep slope, and then rear would be 50. So kind of have a sense, but again, based on your comments and questions, we'll talk and we will be sure to prepare whatever information is necessary to respond to your questions.
Okay. All right, that's all I have for now.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Stiglitz?
So, Kathy, the side yard setback, it's 20 feet from the steep slope setback line, correct?
No, the standard side yard setback in R4 is 20 feet, but on the north side, because you have the ravine, and you have that plan in your packet, so that was one thing we did request, and they did proceed and have an engineer do that work. So the steep slope setback is measured 20 feet from the point at which the 22-degree slope extended from the bottom of the ravine to the point at which it breaks the tableland. It's 20 feet back from that. So that would be the setback on the north side. So it's more than 20 feet from the property line.
Okay. And then the rear yard setback would be 50 feet from the garden?
It would depend how the lots were configured.
Well, I mean, I think we're talking about bisecting it like just about at the, the west end of the garden, right? And I think that's what the plan was, so that the entire garden would be on lot 27.
28.
28, I'm sorry.
I will let Nate, again, we don't have a specific plan that configures the lots exactly.
Okay.
Currently, the tax lots break it, I believe, at the wall that's just east of the fountain. Is that correct?
That's right. You can kind of see in this plan here, the steep slope setback Kathy was referring to is the pink line at the top of that. So that's like the most extreme setback. Then you can see sort of like the line that's bisecting the two lots where lot 27 kind of notches back to lot 28. That's where we would propose to separate the lots. That's a historic division of between lot 27 and 28. So it's kind of a natural place to break the lots. It also makes two lots that are generally the same size. Whenever this was platted, they were probably kind of just trying to come up with regular lots. We explored some other ways of splitting up the lots, but this really just made the most sense.
So one more time on where it would split. Is it to the east or to the west of the, do you have a pointer? Yeah. So that line right there.
Yeah.
So the rear yard setback would be from that lot line, even though it may be in the garden. Is that right, Kathy?
This one's
We don't have a plat of subdivision. I think what you're hearing is what their intention is, but what we want to hear is comments from you, that may lead to a discussion between staff and the petitioner about how those lots are configured. Certainly, whether the garden should be kept intact on a single lot is something that could be considered.
And which commission has authority over the gardens? At HPC or there's?
The Plan Commission has authority over lot lines and setbacks and allowances that you can build into a subdivision. Again, plan preservation subdivision gives you a lot of latitude. You could put a note on the plat that acknowledges or exempts some of the square footage of the existing structures. Ultimately, if changes are proposed to the structures, to the garden, the Historic Preservation Commission would be involved. And I did in the staff report note that this might be one. It wouldn't be unprecedented for the Plan Commission to refer a matter like this to the HPC just for high-level discussion. They have no purview over the subdivision or any parameters that this commission chooses to recommend on that subdivision plat, but ultimately they will be involved in discussion. So perhaps it makes sense to give them some ownership and some input into the discussion before you make any final decisions on this. So that's a possibility for us to bring it to the Historic Preservation Commission just for broad discussion.
So they do have purview over the garden, though, correct?
If there were going to be changes to the
There are
garden.
going to be changes to the garden?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had.
Commissioner Davey.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, because I was going to start to ask questions about, and I understand that this isn't the plan, but you've got a line right here between the garden and the fountain, and so it seems like that's really not for us. I mean, seems like that's an HPC conversation. But Kathy, let me ask you, and I'm going to kind of move into the world of devil's advocate for a second here, because I'm just curious if you can give us some guidance, because we've got a family here that's obviously long, standing stewards of this property. Clearly, based on what you put together, there's a lot of attention to the historic nature of the property. Like, what's a worst case scenario on this property if we don't figure out how to do this in the right way, that, as a mind towards preservation, and the owners, and the property is sold to somebody else as a developer. It's a 6-acre piece of property. Recognize everything else that I've read about this. Give me worst case scenario on, what developers could try to do to this property.
I'm not sure I want to put that out there publicly.
Okay, well,
But
It's a good way to look at it, though.
I just kind of
because-
want
You-
to, what
you
I'm
are
trying to do is, I want to
absolutely
frame
right.
this, I want to frame this because
if
it's important to understand, like, what are we dealing with here?
if Mr. Mears and Ms. Rice weren't sitting here and instead we were dealing with a developer, as you said, it's almost a 6-acre piece of property. The R4 zoning district has a minimum lot size of 60,000 square feet, or about 1.5 acres. So we could be in for a big fight. We would certainly fight very hard to protect the ravine, to protect the structures, to protect at least portions of the garden. But we all know we have been in disagreements with developers in the past. We have been in litigation, and I believe if this was just put out there on the market and someone else picked it up, that someone would want to do something, my guess, that would not be palatable to the city and perhaps would not be in the city's long-term interest. So I don't want to get too specific.
No, I get it.
But
I was just curious because I wanted to
I do have
frame it.
visions that would keep me up at night of
And I
what
also
someone might
think-
propose.
Also important to give you guys direction on, hey, like, what are the I's and T's that have to be dotted and crossed, and who else do we need to bring into the process to make sure that you don't waste time and that we get this right. So I'll have more questions, but that's it for kind of baseline.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. A question for the family. I know it's not your intention in the short term to build a single-family residence on the east lot, but I'd be very interested in your thoughts on how we might define parameters for that subdivision, if we were to go that way, that would protect the historic integrity of the property. That's something that this commission may be charged with at some point. And I don't know of anybody better positioned to answer that question than the family that's been astonishingly good stewards of it for 100 years. And I'd be really interested in your thoughts on if you could define that how you wanted to. What would you do?
Well, first, sorry, pardon me. First of all, there's genuinely absolutely no intention to do that. My husband and I live in Lake Bluff, 10 minutes from there, in a home that we built 7 years ago. We have 4 young sons. We definitely do not want to build any homes in our that we foresee. Of course, you want to think about what happens at the time of our demise or in 30 or 40 years from now, or, you never know what life is going to bring. I think that's a really interesting question. If we were doing that as, like, let's say a retired couple, which is, again, not our intention because we intend to leave the home we're in feet first, as my mom would say. But if we were, I think we would build a small home on the front empty area of that east lot, which is quite large, so that you could still enjoy the historic garden as your garden. And so you would put a small home on that lot, and then you would still maintain the integrity of the garden. And when we were talking about all of this long ago and trying to figure out how we could make this work to keep this in our family, because we both and our spouses and our children have such a deep love for this property, it's not, as these things happen in life, it didn't end up being the ideal timing with young families. And my brother's having a baby in 2 days, by the way. He's up here. So we have a lot going on. But that was when we thought about ever having that east lot have a structure on it, that would be what it was. But again, I want to stress that what we really want to just enjoy the garden as the garden is. That's why we truly have a love for it. We're there all the time. And we're not looking to put anything on it that is a home. We just, you want to think about the value of it for the very long term. But that's, hopefully, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anything else, Commissioner
No.
Thomas? Sure. Commissioner Niren, you've thought about your questions more now? Okay, good. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I probably jump around everywhere, so I apologize. One question I had, because it's always kind of troubled me with the garden, it's absolutely stunning. And then you have the fountain, but you're going to separate the fountain on lot 27. It doesn't mean you have to do a straight line. You can, do it. Is that what you're thinking of doing? Because it just seems like it's just kind of strange. Like, here's the end of their property. Hello, you have a fountain, and then I just think it's kind of just at the wrong route.
So yeah, it does look a little kind of strange when you look at kind of the plan cutting the fountain off, but we did talk about it a couple different ways, and the reason that we ended up with this kind of clean break is that, first of all, we didn't want to get too complex with the property line, and that part of the garden that extends onto lot 27 is a curved portion of the garden. So then we were thinking, well, maybe the property line is right at that wall, and so the whole garden is in lot 28. That brings up the question then, how do you maintain that brick wall? You probably need a little bit of land that then gives you a strip by that wall so that you can maintain it. Once you create that strip, then you have this piece of land that's out of sight, out of mind. The person on lot 28 is not going to go back there and mow it or take care of it. So taking that into consideration, we thought the straight line that just goes through the property just made the most sense. Right now there is obviously going to be friendly ownership of those 2 parcels, so there's no kind of short-term concern about that. And then in the long term, there could be protections for the garden in other ways.
Okay, thank you for that. Question, in terms of, you had mentioned a pool or a pool house and possibly like your visions. And I think it's important that if you have visions of different things you want to build, it would be important because then maybe we can do variances for the setback or what have you. Because right now you have a tennis court where it's the grass one. I thought you did Wimbledon and you did New York. That's what it seemed like with the tennis courts. So where you have your Wimbledon, I would think you'd be putting it out, going it out that way. And that would be a curious question I'd want to know, is that these are things that you see as vision for lot 27. Hey, in time, like you mentioned the driveway, you mentioned the connection. My question is on the garages. Are the garages suitable for the type of cars that we have today? Are you gonna have to expand that garage and make it a 4-car garage? And that is in the ravine setback, and that is another thing. So that's why it would be helpful to know, I mean, for me personally, just to know that, so that way we could, as a commission, try and also help you, you know what I mean, and work with you and stuff like that, to make this something that you want in terms of your home and then happiness. In terms of lot 28, when you were talking about the garden, and she was talking about the building of the house, I don't know if we can put on that like a bulk rate in terms of for the plan commission, if we can do something of that nature, because she is correct. There is a ton of room and you can go very wide with the house. So you can make a nice, decent sized square footage, I mean, very big. I'm not talking like it's the size of a 1-car garage. But you could do that as a precaution, and that would set up for the garden, where it would back up to the garden and you would have the garden, like exactly what she was talking about as a vision.
We did do some exploration on that, and this was, Kathy was really helpful in pushing us to envision various scenarios. And there's an interest from the city's point of view to keep that lot as a developable lot, so that in the future it's not just an undeveloped lot that no one wants to maintain. So there is some value in having that ability to develop the lot. Just looking at the 50-foot setback from Lake Road and the front of the garden, we did do an exercise where we took a footprint, actually of Marion's current house, and just put it in that area, and it fits. Not that we want to do that, but you could put a fairly large house beyond the 50-foot setback, and it would maintain the garden.
Right, and then there's because you have the steep setback where it's an extra 20 feet on this side, so maybe on this side, the neighbor to you, they're actually in your setback, and that they're not by code. So it's just, and they are very, I mean, there's a whole bunch of trees, there's, things separating it where there's play maybe you can do, if that's something that we think of. I mean, I'm just posing ideas of try to help them so where it's in the future, so say you do have to sell it or something happens, it restricts it a little bit, so you're not talking about what you were saying with the subdivision, because the garden would be protected by the Historic Preservation Committee, and stuff like that. So that was that question, and then I got another one here. The side property coming from Elm Tree. There's a lot of feet there in terms of like with the tennis court with the fence and then that yard and all that. And if they don't build out in terms of building whatever they want, are they thinking of possibly that they would sell that off? Is that something that they're gonna try and subdivide lot 27 again, just out of curiosity? Is that a thought in the future or whatever? Because it's a big piece.
There's no thought about that. The two lots, they actually are, the lot 28 is smaller, but they're not vastly different sizes.
Okay.
It's really the configuration, but there's no desire to sell that portion of the lot off.
Okay, thank you. And then Kathy, in terms of the tennis courts, is there any way, because that how it's absolutely phenomenal how they did that in the ravine, and they did it way back then with that technology. I mean, it's brilliant. Is there any way to protect it? Like, I know that they're not going to try and tear that down or what have you, but is there any way to protect that structure would have to stay, or there's something that would prohibit somebody, if there was a new owner, that they couldn't tear it? I'm just thinking in the future to protect it, the ravine.
All of the structure, the entire property is within the city's historic district. Any
Okay.
demolition would need to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission, would need to be found to meet the demolition criteria.
Okay.
Certainly it could go beyond that and put a facade easement on some portion of the structure or the entire structure. That's something that would be through Landmarks Illinois and not through the city.
Okay. Another question for you. Sorry. You have beautiful arborvitae. You have a lot of arborvitaes,
Yeah.
gorgeously placed. But in the back property, you have a beautiful borderline on Elm Tree. Is the owner planning to keep that? They're not going to tear it down, are they?
Yeah, the owner really appreciates the privacy that arborvitae provides, especially, I mean, when you get back there, you feel like you're in another world. And it's kind of nice, Elm Tree, that it's not a drive-through street, so it is kind of a nice little nestled back area. The existing gate, we explored other options for coming into the property. The Adler driveway was actually a little bit further north where it outlet onto Elm Tree Road. But that current driveway location gives you like a perfect setup for a great vista of the house. You wouldn't need to take down any arborvitae. You could maintain that hedgerow.
I was just curious on that. Okay, thank you, sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a lot of thoughts and comments here, but why don't we keep moving this forward here this evening? It's now the opportunity to get some input on public testimony. And I know we have some members here in the audience. I'd like to see if anybody that's wishing to testify here this evening, would you like to come forward? Please come forward. Please come forward and state your name for the record, please.
And I would just note, you did receive a few letters, so.
And I'll go
just to-
through that. We did receive some letters and also a report from the Preservation Commission.
Hi, I'm Jan Gibson, and I'm representing the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation tonight. I just want to highlight, I think you received a 2-page preliminary statement from us. I just want to highlight a couple things from, actually on the second page. First paragraph. As a general matter, the Preservation Foundation opposes subdividing estates that compromise the architectural character and vision of the original estate design and function. In this instance, however, the subject property was divided long ago from the main house, and what remains is a single zone lot containing what were the support functions. At this point, the foundation believes that the most important consideration would be how best to preserve the historic character of the subject property as part of the original estate. On to paragraph 3. As suggested in the staff report, the foundation believes that the proper course would be to, for the Plan Commission to refer this matter to the HPC. More specifically, the HPC could advise the Plan Commission on measures available to preserve the historic character of the property should it be divided into 2 buildable lots. And in paragraph 4, the addition to the landmark designations, guidelines for this project, and it's important to hear this, for example, could well include limitations that would ensure that any single-family home must, 1, be visually compatible with service buildings on the subject property in style, in scale, and finishes, and 2, would be situated as proposed to maintain and complement the historic garden. This would ensure that if there were any significant new construction, it would be thoughtful and preserve the historic estate character of the property. And finally, there may be other measures, even mentioned tonight, available to the HPC and the homeowner, such as facade easements, the potential use of which might aid the Plan Commission's analysis as to the viability of the proposed subdivision of the property into 2 buildable lots. The foundation believes that the HPC is uniquely and administratively suited to provide such insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here this evening that would like to speak? Are there any other final questions from commission members? We're not closing. I'm just sort of going through sort of our normal protocol here. This isn't an open public meeting or hearing on this. So, but are there any other comments, questions? Please,
Yeah.
Commissioner Moorhead.
I have a question. Have you looked at the title and survey to see if there's any restrictive covenants or deed restrictions on the property relating to the development at all?
I don't believe there are,
Okay.
but that is something we could look into.
Okay. Given the nature of the property, there's a chance there could be something like that. There's always a possibility. And then one for Kathy. My understanding is under the Illinois Plat Act, this property conceivably could be subdivided without coming to us they could just go subdivide it on their own. But in Lake Forest, We have further restrictions, and is that, I looked, but are those restrictions in the subdivision code, part of the code, or where would those be?
Those restrictions are in the subdivision chapter, I believe, and can't quote it verbatim, but any division of land within the city of Lake Forest requires a subdivision plat.
Okay,
And
That requires them to come before the plan commission.
correct.
okay, all right. That's all I had.
Thank you. Nate, do you have any other comments, points for clarification that you'd like to give us here this evening? Where we're at this time, I'm sure there's a lot more to discuss here, but
I guess the one final kind of closing comment, and maybe this touches something you were mentioning, and I think somebody else too, is obviously, as Kathy indicated, there aren't setbacks set for the subdivided property, but when we were looking at this kind of for future use and as a subdivided property, we really were thinking about, this is the backyard, so the backyard setback in the garden on this side, and the side yard on this side is the 20-foot. That's the way we envisioned it. So just to share that, I know you were kind of talking about where we might site buildings, and that kind of keys into that.
okay, thank you. I guess I'd, again, like to stress, we're not closing this. We appreciate the input from the Rices and the Mears and from Northworks. This is helpful. I guess my comments at this point, I'm not sensing from the commission here that there's really a feeling that this shouldn't happen, but I guess I'm sensing that we just don't have enough information at this point. I think that based on what this commission has done previously, and albeit a little bit differently, but if you go back and see what we did at our February meeting, there are many similarities to the property that we discussed at our February meeting to the property, in a general sense, to this property. With that said, there is clearly a lot going on this piece of property, primarily because of its location, primarily because of the ravine, the setbacks, the steep slope, the variances that would need to take place. I think the commission really needs some more detailed options of what would be proposed. I do think that it would be helpful, and maybe we'll take a informal poll here this evening, but I don't think there would be any opposition to it, and I don't sense there'd be any opposition from the petitioner to send this to the Historic Preservation Commission and have them look at this. And I'm certainly, by no means do we want to drag this out and drag the family through this, but I do think it's important. It's been pointed out that we have a very willing owner of this property to work with the city and come up with a responsible plan that makes sense not only for the city, the neighbors, and the historic nature of this property, but it really a plan that would be a win-win for all the parties involved. But we really need, and I think I'm collectively speaking, and any of the commissioners can jump in and disagree with me, but I think we need more information and slightly more of a roadmap of what we can sort of make decisions on. One thing we didn't talk about here this evening, for example, is drainage. If Lot 28 were to have a new structure put on it, making that an impervious surface, what would happen to that drainage? Would it go down into the ravine and slough off the top of the ravine? Would we require the drainage to go down all the way to the bottom of the ravine? I mean, those are some of the things that need to be taken into consideration that we, I think, as a commission, don't necessarily have those tools, but we could use greater input not only from the city, as to what all those issues are and what we really should be looking at, so that when we consider what we would like and possibly take into consideration, because I don't want to say anything as a foregone conclusion, but take into consideration the subdivision of these properties. We just need more of that information, and certainly a starting point would be going and getting the Historic Preservation Commission input. Any response maybe from fellow
I
commissioners
agree
on
with
that?
you, they should be, but I don't know if we should get more information first of what their vision is. And we look at, okay, this is, it's in this part, it's the setback or what, and then we send it to the Historic Preservation Committee, and then they look at what we've said and what have you. Or do we just want to have it, are you talking about where they would go to the Historic Preservation Committee and just present it like this as well, and then get feedback from them, and then come back here? Is that, I'm just trying to
They may have
follow.
the same questions, what's the
Well,
intention, right?
Well, I mean, I guess we could turn to city staff. You're right. I mean, at some point, there has to be movement on it, right? I mean, we can't just send it, and maybe honestly, I mean, and Commissioner Nairn, you raise a good point. I mean, maybe the Historic Preservation Commission would look at it and be like, we have the same sort of feeling on it that the Plan Commission did. And again, I'm sensing a willingness from everybody, and again, not even from the Historic Preservation Commission, but we heard here this evening that, and we have some comments from some of the neighbors, and in essence, the neighbor from across the street, the Reed Andersons, who are on the original 315, I might get all my numbers confused, estate, that, I don't necessarily think they're opposed, but, they would like to see some more information. So it's not fully baked yet, and I guess a question of how we get it there, maybe I'll see if Ms.
Sure.
Cernak has a
And again, we discourage the petitioners from moving into a solution. What I think I've heard so far from the commission, and this is exactly what we wanted to hear, is that you want us to look further, give some careful consideration to lot configuration, to the desire, providing the opportunity for future structures, understanding what the desire might be, but even looking longer term. How do we deal with the square footage, knowing that we have a significant overage? How do we respond to that, and how do we provide some opportunity or address that in some way? We need a tree survey. Are there significant trees that should help us, that should inform exactly what the buildable areas are, how we establish setbacks, whether we go with existing setbacks or we create setbacks through the plan preservation subdivision, how we deal with drainage, how we deal with access, the existing driveway. Does that get called out of the subdivision plat as a time-limited access to the property until properties are sold into different ownerships or until there's a house built? Should there be some limitation on that access? Where future access might be appropriate off of Elm Tree Road? Protection of historic elements, is there or should there be some heightened protection of some of the elements? Should the garden remain intact? Do we look at the property lines and do we get creative with the property lines, or do we split the garden? Should a landscape buffer remain and be required to remain on the Elm Tree Road side or anywhere else? So those were some of the things that I've heard so far, and those will help us continue discussions with the petitioners, and those same topics may be appropriate for input from the HPC. So I think we're doing tonight exactly what we had hoped we would achieve.
I would just like to add, along with what Commissioner Nearing had said, I would be in favor of keeping it here until, I think there will be a time and place for historic preservation to to have some input, but, you know, I think with what we're looking at with this single zoning lot, this is not a cookie cutter solution. It's certainly, you know, 17, points that it's gonna have to meet to get approval. I feel like the plan preservation subdivision is intended to allow flexibility. I think it's gonna require flexibility and creativity to come up with a solution. Those are not exactly two terms you'd associate with HPC at this time, so I think that, that would be my,
And I think, sorry, and I think the owners as well, they've been very good stewards, and we've been saying that
Yep.
For so long. And, they've come to us to say, hey, what can we do? This is our vision, this is what, I think we need to work with them first before we send them to that's just my opinion.
I think those are all good comments. Commissioner Davey, do you?
Yeah, I have some comments, but do you, petitioner, want to make a comment?
Yeah,
That'd be great.
Bill Bickford, Northworks Architects. These are all great discussions and great points that Kathy has made. And I would propose that we come back to you with a plan that shows the defined lot line between the two new zoned separate parcels. And we propose to you, with the compliance of Lake Forest zoning, what those setbacks should be for the east side property. And we'll discuss with the new owners how we include that garden wall. That's the thing in my mind that needs more review on our side. And if we have a good solution that we propose to you, then with your feedback, we could review with HPC. But since there really is no intention to change any historic structure or nature of the property as you experience it, I'd love to define what those lots are, what those setbacks are, what the potential buildability is of the east side, just to have on record before we review that with historic preservation. And the current legal owner, Stephen Bent, he's a young 83, but he definitely has a sense of urgency to move this forward and make sure it lands in good hands while he's still alive.
Yeah, I think thank you.
Yeah, no, I think these are all great ideas, and I think, and in comments, I didn't mean to cut you off, Commissioner Davey, and it does seem as if the appropriate step, and I certainly think that because it's under our purview to look at this, I do think it would be helpful to when you come back to us, it was raised by Commissioner Nearing and others, just, again, they're hypothetical, that wouldn't be bound by, but, it was mentioned, I think Nate mentioned a structure overlay on lot 28. Just maybe come and show what that would look like. It's certainly a lot easier to see, and certainly there's no intention to put a structure on lot 28 right now, but just what that would look like. And, pardon me, where the driveway on lot 27 possibly would go. Again, just, I think that's helpful information as we continue to define and scope the issues. Commissioner Davey?
Yeah, I think it's great. I appreciate the comment, and because again, I think it sounds like everybody here is interested in trying to figure out a solution. And my comments were more towards kind of intentionality, because there is sensitivity around these types of things, right? And also just sequencing and not wanting to waste people's time. It seems to me like we have an opportunity to give the owners who are good stewards of this property, an opportunity to do what they're trying to do, an opportunity for all of us as a city to try to protect the property long-term through, a negotiation effectively here, and to do something in an appropriate process that doesn't drag on forever and ever, to your point, Bill. It seems to me like that's the intentionality, and so that's about sequence, right? And so if the sequence is, hey, let's have them come back one more time to begin to kind of figure it out. Ultimately, it seems like HPC will be involved. So
Absolutely.
You don't want to get too far down the road without getting HPC involved and then having those conversations, so.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but I'm just really concerned because, their ideas of what they'd like to do, which I thought definitely makes a lot of sense. It's in the steep back, because
Yeah.
of that. And it's just to try and help them so they can also achieve what they want, because after all, it is their property, so.
And I think, thank you. Thank you for everybody being here this evening, those that are here, also in the audience. It would also probably help, I think, the public to be able to have greater input on it if there was that vision. So I guess my last comment is, patience on everybody's part. I think, that this is a work in progress, but I'm sensing that there's a willingness here from all the parties, as I said earlier, to get this done. So, thank you. Any other comments from staff or any other commissioners at this time? So, from a formal standpoint, Kathy, that's how we're leaving it this evening,
Yes,
correct?
no motion, you didn't open a public hearing. So we'll take your comments and we'll work with the petitioners.
Thank you. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
The next item before the commission this evening is consideration of adaptation of an updated zoning map. No zoning changes are being proposed. This is just a periodic update to the official zoning map. The last zoning map was adopted in January of 2019. State statutes require us to readopt an official zoning map from time to time. All zoning changes have been previously approved, and nothing is subject this evening to re-review. At this point, as a formality, I would like to ask any commission members if they have any conflicts of interest or ex parte communication in regards to the official zoning map. I'm looking to the left and looking to the right, and I don't see any. I'll now turn this over to Ms. Cernak for presentation this evening on this issue.
Chairman Dixon, you covered it so well. I don't have anything to add, but I would be happy to answer questions. This is a formality that we do every few years. So I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions.
I don't see any questions. Okay, that's good. At this point, do we have a motion for an adaptation of the updated official zoning map that we can send to the city council?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
I'm
thank
gonna
you.
guess who made the motion, guess at who made the motion and second, so. Thank you.
Okay. Other items, opportunity for the public to address the Plan Commission, seeing nobody here in the public. Anything else from staff this evening? Any announcements or any other business?
No, we will sit down with the petitioners and work through some alternatives and try and move them toward a formal submittal and bring it back to you.
Okay. Any other matters that you see possibly coming, other than the matter this evening, possibly in June, or?
There's still discussion about subdivisions along Saunders Road. I hear about them. You've seen them multiple times. You recommend approval, they expire, and then someone else looks at them. So there's some of that floating around out there, but
Okay,
no promises.
thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.